Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, I'm going to be going over one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of the UK. On the 18th of April 1943, in this wood here, four teenage boys would find the body of a dead woman hidden in an ancient elm tree. What would transpire next would be a story of witchcraft, public graffiti, and even Nazi spies. Come with me as we try and answer one simple question that has been haunting this area of the UK for over 80 years. Who put Bella in the Wych Elm?
So I went to Hagley Woods, and it was in those woods that the body of a young woman was found stuffed into a wych elm. Now, the original tree is to have been removed or even lost to time. So I'm going to lay out the cold, hard facts about that day in 1943 before going into the many theories that surround it. A decomposed body of a young woman was found in those woods by four boys looking for birds' eggs. They did not tell the police right away, instead, opting for secrecy between the friends due to the fear of getting in trouble for poaching. This is a well repeated story, we are told. However, the official statements taken by police from the boys regarding the discovery have since gone missing. This means all the recollections that day are from authors or newspapers, and while I would obviously prefer to use original sources from the statements, it just isn't possible in this case. But on Sunday, the 18th of April, 1943, four boys from Lye and Wallinscott were out walking the Clent and Walton Hills. 17-year-old Tommy Willits, 15-year-old Bob Farmer, 15-year-old Robert Hart, and the youngest, 14-year-old Fred Payne. Alongside them were their two lurcher dogs. They originally set out with the hopes of catching rabbits, which was due to wartime rationing. After a long day heading north along what is now Hagley Wood Lane, they took a detour into the woods in search of eggs. After venturing a short distance into the woods, 15-year-old Bob Farmer spotted a blackbird leaving an old elm tree. He went to investigate and finding four eggs. Upon his discovery, he directed young Robert Hart in the other nearby tree to also look for blackbird eggs. Robert climbed up a series of branches to gain some height and looked down into the hollow of the tree. Inside, he thought he saw an animal skull and called to all three of the boys over to investigate. The hollow of the tree was around 3 to 3.5 feet deep, meaning it was longer than the arm's length. Bob broke a branch off to use as a means to lift the skull out of the hollow. The stick lodged in what we call the foria magnum, a small hole in the base of the skull that connects the spinal cord to the skull, and was able to pull this skull out. Once they had the skull out, they realized that this was not just some boyish fun, but it's actually quite a grisly discovery. They placed the skull back in the hollow of the tree, and under fear of being caught not only trespassing, but near a human body, they quickly left the woods. They fled northwest and ended up running into Fred Payne's older brother, Donald Payne, on the outskirts of Wallinscott. Upon telling Donald, they all returned once again to Hagley Woods, and again, using the same stick, hooked the skull out of the hollow. As kids do, they all swore to secrecy due to fear of being caught poaching in the woods. However, that very evening, Tommy Willits told his father, and they headed straight to Lye Police Station and met with Sergeant Charles Lambourne about the discovery the boys had made. Due to the blackout laws due to the ongoing German bombing, the sergeant decided against venturing out that night, opting to head to the scene in the morning. When they did arrive on the 19th, Sergeant Lambourne, Sergeant Richard Skerritt, and Constable Jack Pound, as well as Sergeant Jack Wheeler, all followed Tommy Willits to the tree. Once they were there and sure of the boys' gruesome discovery, they reported it to the county CID. Due to the lack of phone lines at that time and the remoteness of the location, by the time CID was informed, it was now too late to get any detectives to the scene, and again, they would be sent the next day. So Officer Douglas Osborne guarded the tree and its contents overnight, which, that's terrifying. Guarding a body in a hollow witch tree in the middle of the abandoned woods during the height of World War II. That's just. Woo. On the afternoon of the 20th of April, Detective Superintendent Sidney Insight and pathologist James Webster arrived at the scene.
So, where exactly is the original tree's location? Well, we're here in Hagley Wood, originally called Bluebell Wood at the time, just on the outskirts of Birmingham in the West Midlands in England. Now, there's a lot of different reports on where the tree could originally be. So I'm going to lay off a couple of facts here. So I will be reading a script because I can't remember everything about World War II here. Um, At the time, this would have been popular in World War II because this was the height of the Blitz, and areas like the Black Country and Birmingham, where we're nearby, were targeted because they were areas of manufacturing. So people would come here and search for firewood or berries or even, you know, some animals to eat. And that's what the boys were doing that day. They travelled down here, four of them, with their two lurcher dogs in the search of rabbits. They were actually in another wood just up the road, but they came along here. When they came along here, they found a blackbird coming out of one tree, and when they went up to investigate, they had a further look in, finding some eggs. One of the boys then called across to the other one to have a look in another hollowed out tree, and that is where the body of Bella was found. The woods are generally in the same area. I don't know if you can hear, but there are some cars going past. There's obviously been changes in the landscape in terms of infrastructure and housing, but relatively saying, these have been here for roughly about 1,000 years. The earliest we can go back is to the Doomsday Book. So these are real, proper ancient woodlands. The world's loudest motorbike ever going past as I talk about how beautiful and nature this is. The forestry rights to use this land at the time were being used by J.T. Willets and Son. They owned a timber yard across the road from the Rose and Crown pub in the village of Hagley, just up the road. That is important later, and we will talk about the Rose and Crown when we get to it, as well as the people who own the forestry rights, because they may tie into a lot of this. Now, the actual tree is widely reported to be a wych elm. However, it's quite likely that it wasn't actually a wych elm, and just the story and the words of wych elm, witchcraft, work really well together and sounds a little bit more creepy. Now, it's quite likely that it was a hazelnut tree because there are lots of hazelnut carcasses found within the hollow of the tree alongside the body. I think any documentary or any sort of YouTube video that doesn't mention that this might not even be a wych elm probably hasn't done a lot of research. So just be aware that while I'm going to use the words wych elm, I'm well aware to people who are into this case that it might not be a wych elm. Now, the tree's actual location is up for questioning. There are a few various reports. It is most likely here in Hagley Wood. However, it could also be in Witchbury Wood, which is just up the road, but that's very unlikely. The official report given by Sergeant Skrennet places the tree approximately 630 yards, around 570 metres, on Hagley Wood Lane, which is where we just are now, from the main road to Birmingham. Obviously, the roads have changed since then. We are currently best guests there and about 40 yards into the woods, which is what he suggested, which would put it about here. And obviously, I can't see any hollow tree, anything that's unusual. We're obviously stood by a tree, but this isn't a wych elm because you can tell by the leaves, and it isn't a hazelnut tree either because, again, the leaves. I've read a lot the last couple of days about how to identify trees in the hopes that I may suddenly find it here, but so then in 2017, let's do it again. Serious documentarian. Okay, ready, go. So then in 2017, there was a documentary made about Bella in the Wych Elm, and from their reports and their extensive research, it would place the tree, well, about here. Now, I couldn't stuff a body in there, so I think they've got a lot wrong. Watching that documentary before writing this, I found a lot of errors in their reporting, and a few of the more sensationalized YouTube videos, while they are entertaining, don't necessarily provide the facts that are needed. And that's what I'm trying to lay out here. We will talk about witches, we will talk about Nazi spies, we will talk about the graffiti when we get to it, but right now I'm trying to establish the facts so then we can work backwards towards the theories.
Another thing to note that was later, a witness came forward just shortly after the discovery of the body, informing police of a very nasty smell at the bend of the lane around where the body was found a couple of days ago. Further locations for the tree, as referenced in 1944, a handbag was found by a local police officer. The bag was not related to the case anyway, but before it was confirmed, the officer submitted information about the location of the handbag's discovery and used the Wych Elm as a navigation point to provide context. All of these, as well as a few others not mentioned, triangulate onto the southeast corner of Hagley Woods. about here.
So now the most common reported site of it is about 115 meters down the road on a bend and is around about 20-30 yards within the woods themselves. This comes from Richard Reichbach, who was a former groundskeeper here at Hagley Woods, and this puts it about here. Now there is an ancient sort of looking stump here, clearly really old, and has the right markings to be either a wych elm or a hazelnut tree, as mentioned. Now, having a little look around in this area, we are really quite deep into the middle of some random creepy woods. This seems pretty accurate in terms of other descriptions based on the later handbag case that we'll talk about, the collaborations between the four boys who found it, as well as the sergeants and detectives. It's quite weird to be stood in a place that could be part of a case that you've been obsessed with for, God, I don't know, 15 years. This place has only ever been about an hour away from where I live currently. And it's weird. These woods do feel unnerving. They feel creepy. They feel odd. I'm constantly thinking about the Blair Witch Project the entire time I'm here. Um, and even though this, might not be something related to witchcraft or spies or whatever, what happened here still is that a young woman's life was taken, was choked out, was killed, and was stuffed inside an ancient tree. Now, if that doesn't sort of chill you to your core, I don't really know what is. We're going to talk more about the theories as we go on, but I think it is important to note that this is where someone died, and it's a genuinely really interesting case. I'm a little bit emotional, is maybe the wrong word, but yeah, it's an odd feeling. Now, all of the reports that I've said locate to about the south, I think, east corner, which is where I am currently. Now, the tree was very likely burnt down or even chopped down by vandals at some point. This is like a common folk tale around here. So it's not unusual for people to maybe come and spend Halloween night out here to invoke some witchcraft. Now, this is a real, this is a really odd place to be, and it feels, I feel watched. And that could just be because there's could be cameras in these woods, but um, these woods feel ancient. These woods feel older than anything I've ever been around, and it's an unsettling place. Now, I don't necessarily believe in the whole witchcraft side of this. We're going to go over those theories as they come up, but I think it's important to note that this is just an unsettling area. These woods would have been home to ancient Britain peoples that will have practiced witchcraft, and I don't know, maybe it's the hippie in me, but I always find ancient British woodlands like this quite emotionally engaging, quite interesting. Um, yeah, and just quite spiritual in a weird way. Maybe that's odd. That's a bit odd, but there we go. Cool. It's mad to think that this could be the tree. It's unusual. It's weird. I can't quite fathom being stood here.
The actual tree has one famous image in circulation with a large arrow indicating that the body was found here. However, this image is not from the original case files and is in fact dated to around 10 years after the case. It was published in the Wolverhampton Express and Standard, a local newspaper, on the 20th of November 1953 in the article named Night to Hagley Woods and the Ghoulish Tree Coffin. The conclusions, I reach on the facts. It's okay. It's an okay article. I've read it, but it was by an author named Quester Seeker, which is the pen name for Lieutenant Colonel Wilfred Byford Jones. It's a hell of a name. It is not known exactly what the origin of the image is, and the Express and the Star no longer keeps a copy of the files on archive, and I have reached out to try and request the original image, but they're not able to provide. Now, there are confirmed photographs of the original crime scene. However, the original negatives have gone missing. And again, if you watch this very terrible documentary, and this is the only image of the witch elm you'll see, it will show that the research isn't great. A photo of a tree from 10 years after the fact, based on unclear maps when the original tree is likely to not even be a witch elm, is kind of bad. Most of the actual photos are taken in line with 1930s police investigations around murder cases. This was that nothing should be disturbed until a police surgeon had fully inspected and photographed the scene. D.I. Williams attended and photographed the scene on the 20th of April, taking 45 photographs. In development of some of these photos, they were damaged and then a further amount were mislaid, leaving only 19 of the 45 in the Worcestershire archive. After all photographs were taken and all relevant evidence was collected and sent to Dr. John Lund and Professor James Webster for various examinations. The tree was alive at the time and in early bloom. This was in line with the spring date mentioned in the investigation. The area was covered in bluebells and undergrowth. As mentioned, the tree had lots of sprouting shoots due to this coppicing. The sergeant and James Webster described the tree as around 5 and 5.5 feet tall, with the hollow being around 3 and 3.5 feet to the ground. The entrance to the hollow is around 24 inches, which probably about my wrist to my shoulder sort of thing, and is instead narrow to the bottom at around 17 inches. So probably about there to there, maybe there to there, a little bit shorter, with the height of the entrance being around 12 inches. That's really small for a person to fit in, even with Bella being only 5 foot tall. There are really only four ways that the body could have ended up in that tree: an accident, which is one theory that she hid in the tree during an air raid, but as discussed, the entrance was extremely narrow. It's also be extremely difficult to get in there and not cause injury to yourself under your own force. Again, self unaliving, I hate YouTube, is a theory, but the ability to get in this tree is very, very difficult and unlikely. The final two theories about how the body is there make a little bit more sense post murder placement, with Professor Webster saying, and I quote, "The tree, however, afforded an excellent concealment for murder." Webster then goes on to say, "From the position of the skeleton in the bole of the tree, I am of the opinion that this woman was pushed in feet first. Moreover, she could have only been pushed in conveniently either before rigor mortis set in or after rigor mortis had passed on. If the body had been kept until rigor mortis had passed off, putrefaction would have commenced, and it is extremely unlikely that the murderer would have kept the body until it got into this condition. Hence, I am of the opinion the body was pushed into the tree before rigor mortis had set in. This being so, it is likely that the murder was committed in the near vicinity to the tree, or if committed at a distance, the murderer must have had conveyance to enable him to get to the body to the tree before rigor mortis set in." The professor also states that the wood is well known to many people, and the tree in which the body was hidden was the best and indeed the only place where a body could be hidden in the wood. The use of such a place for concealment would appear to indicate local knowledge. Another theory placed forward by authors like Alex Merrill was that the body was placed in post decomposition, with Bella being killed somewhere else and being moved at a later date to the tree. There is evidence that counters this, such as the growth of tree roots and the pooling of blood inside the skull in line with an unmoved cadaver. However, I just thought it was worth putting in. I'd also highly recommend Alex Merrill's book as probably the best document on this sort of case, and really incredible work by him. Bella was most likely pushed in the tree when already dead, and most likely before rigor mortis set in, around 1 to 6 hours after death, when the muscles tense up and the body becomes stiff. This passes after around 12 to 36 hours. So she was either immediately placed in the tree, meaning that she was murdered either really nearby or murdered further away and moved there after 36 hours. Just speculation, but along with some of the theories of who Bella was, I believe it is more likely that she was killed close by the tree rather than soon after. The body was in late stages of decomposition, but the process is affected by many things: humidity, temperature, local wildlife, and the hollow could have also created protection from the elements and may have delayed decomposition process. The police reports state that the body had been completely stripped of flesh and may have remained in a dry condition for years. As mentioned before, the roots were grown through clothing within the tree that, combined with the stages of decomposition, most likely put that Bella had been in the tree for a minimum of around 18 months, placing her death around October 1941. So, what was actually in the hollow of the tree? A human skull laying on top of a thick blanket of debris with some bones visible below. A good amount of bones were further covered by a layer of twigs and leaves, meaning it's likely whoever put in there tried to further conceal her. This goes against the Bella putting herself in the tree theory. This also points to an autumnal murder. I doubt the offender or offenders picked leaves off trees rather than just scooped stuff off the ground and threw it on top in an attempt to hide her body. The skeleton was near complete. The skull had a few missing teeth, most notably the second right molar and the left incisor. From the postmortem, they removed or dropped out after death, which means they should have been found inside the tree, but they weren't. They could have been removed due to gold cap fillings, and the perpetrators may have thought they could have sold them. Beyond that, the teeth were in overall good conditions in terms of health. However, the central incisors were notably protruding. This would have caused a slight facial deformity, which should have made identification easier. The skull had no injuries and had decomposed, but a few hairs were still attached to the right side of the skull. As well, inside the skull was pooled with old blood on the right hand side. These two things are why we come to the conclusion that she was likely upright on her right side. Further inside the skull, as the boys reported they had poked a piece of fabric into the foramen magnum, this was recovered and identified as a piece of skirt also found in the tree. Dr. Lund claims this is the only piece of clothing found in the skull, but Professor Webster claims that he found a piece of the skirt in the lower jaw cavity as well. All sutures on the skull, which are the bits that keep your skull together, are able to be marked both inside and outside the brain cavity, which helps narrow down age, putting her between 25 and 40 years old. Some modern anthropological calculations using this are now revised to be a wider range, from 20 to 50, but the teeth could not be used for aging, as due to the deformity, it was hard to give an accurate dental reading. The hyoid bone, which is in the neck and was not found, most likely due to animals. This bone can be a good indication of whether strangulation has happened, so it is a little disappointing that this has not been found. The pelvis confirmed that the body was biologically female. On the pelvis, we could ID that she had most likely not given birth. However, she had been pregnant at least once. The pelvis, it is noted that the ilium and the rest of the bone was firmly united, a process which the professor indicates takes place at the end of around the 25th year for women. The lower left leg tibia was found some distance from the tree, while the right tibia was completely missing. The left tibia was also found to be incomplete with signs of animal bites, meaning they were most likely scavenged by larger mammals like foxes or badgers. Most notably, the left hand was found around 13 paces from the hollow. There is little or no damage to the hand or the bones, but looks like it should have been a clean severing from the body. This will come back in the theory section, but is reported to be intrinsically tied to witchcraft and tied to the nearby gypsy camp. I just want to clarify as well. I'm not sure what the right term to use, so I'm just going to say it as reported. I will opt to use Roma or Romany people going forward, but there is a possibility that this ties us to another supposed ritual witchcraft sacrifice in the area in 1945, the killing of Charles Walton, which we'll come back to later. And to be honest with you, I'd like to do a full video on at some point. So, the five key findings from the body are that the body is female, Bella is over 25 and below 40, and most likely around 35. Using the Carl Pearson method, we know she is around 5 foot to 4'9". Other than the fabric found in her mouth, the skeleton gave no indication for causes of death. And that five, the body, based on the decomposition, was around a minimum of 18 months old. Another thing to note is that the conditions of the pounds did not give any indication that she worked in a physically stressful job, i.e., agriculture. Bella's clothing, hair, and personal items were also recovered from the scene of her mysterious death, and Dr. Lund and Professor Webster collaborated closely, with Lund's report on the clothing and hair being incorporated into Webster's official autopsy report. Special Constable John Stewart Golfar, who owned a local clothing manufacturer, was consulted to help identify the garments. Together, they identified several items of Bella's clothing: a pair of underpants, an underskirt, a corset, a skirt, and a cardigan. The clothing, though significantly decayed, provided clues about Bella's social status and her circumstances at the time of her death. The underwear were described as low quality, navy blue cotton pair, while the underskirt was believed to be homemade from inexpensive artificial silk. The underskirt was peach or pink, but later revised this option, leaning towards what we call a fawn colour, sort of peachy, I guess. A worn corset with only the metal components surviving indicated that Bella may have been a bit older, as corsets were less common among younger women at that point, and the skirt, assumed to be of good quality, was all wool and possibly mustard or pale khaki in colour, while the cardigan was striped in pale khaki or mustard and dark blue, featuring 5 cloth-coloured buttons and a knitted woolen belt. A case conference on May the 3rd included visual aids like clothing drawings and fabric samples to better understand Bella's wardrobe. Authorities considered creating a colour photograph of a woman dressed in pretty similar clothing to Bella's, but challenges in obtaining colour prints due to war rationing means the idea never actually rationalised. Bella's hair was also extremely closely examined, though it was severely decayed and brittle. It was determined to be light brown, or what we call a mousy colour, with no signs of dye or bleaching and a few grey strands. During a 1956 interview, Professor Webster described the hair as ginger, likely due to the natural red pigmentation within the hair being more resilient than brown, which means it doesn't fade as quickly with decomposition. Experts could not determine Bella's hairstyle or the exact hair length, although some strands measured around 7 inches, leading to the description that it was neither short nor long, pretty average in line with the fashion of the time. The unique forensic analysis and also included observations on what might have been missing. Bella's lack of stockings was notable, as some traces of cotton material would have survived. This, combined with the lightweight nature of her clothing, suggested Bella may have been dressed for actually warmer weather. Finally, Donald McCormick's 1968 book, Murder by Witchcraft, which was instrumental in popularizing the Bella case, has included in his work an image of Bella that would become central to the reconstruction of police investigations and media depictions. Finally, the shoes. The investigations reached out to Gordon Baines of Northampton Boot and Shoe Manufacturer Association. Based on the manufacturing, they were able to identify that they came from the Rossendale district in Lancashire. The shoes were blue and, based on wear and tear, had been around 6 to 8 months of usage. They would have cost around 11 to 16 shillings, which is around £60 now in today's money, which at the time was quite expensive, especially during the wartime. The shoe size was 5.5 English standard at the time, which that is a slightly larger shoe for a woman expected to be a 5 foot. It is also stated that you would expect a woman of that size to wear a round 4 to 4.5 size shoe. Further investigations to show that between April and June 1940, around 133 of this size were manufactured and sold to various suppliers, with the bulk being mail order. The investigation locked onto those shoes as a possible lead and searched the local area shoe shops. Mr. Allen, the owner of the Wedsbury shoe shop, indicated that these were very popular shoes and sold quickly, estimating he may have sold them in around June 1940. The police and investigators believed these belonged to Bella, despite the fact that they were too big with no padding to make them fit a woman of her height. Also, the fact that the shoes contain no foot bones upon recovery. Some posit that these are not Bella's at all, but a red herring placed to distract the police. I don't agree with this. While the bones not being in the shoes is a little odd, it's also not crazy that the cause of death, most likely being strangulation, that they would have been lost in the struggle, and the shoes may have come loose off her actual foot. Also, it's worth noting that the autopsy results cannot reveal if there is any SA involved in the murder. The shoes not fitting to me isn't that odd as well in the UK at this time. The UK government had lots of make do and mend sort of things, meaning that because of rationing, they could have just been repurposed from another family member. So I don't think that's odd. So that's a lot of info. The body of a woman is found in a tree. She's been there for months, missing hand buried nearby, placed there by a third party at the time of death. A weird case, but really, this is only half of the story. So the case went cold. And this seemed like, with no DNA and no witnesses coming forward, that this would be a tragic end to a tragic case. That was until 11 months later, in March 1944, when the West Country and the Black Country would be plastered with graffiti asking that simple question. The first of which appeared in Birmingham's Smithfield Market, when Wilford Lawson, reportedly seeing some chalk writing on a wall of Pershore Street, simply reading the words Hagley Wood, Bella, underlined and etched high up on the wall, and then nearby on Upper Dean Street was the same handwriting again, underlined in chalk was the words Who put Bella down the Wych Elm, Hagley Wood. The police inquiries nearby at the market led to there being 14 people who'd visited the site that day, with only one being from the Hagley area, Mr. H. Edmonds of Halzowen. But investigating officer was satisfied that he had not written the messages. 1 week later in Halzowen, another chalk message appeared, this time asking who put Lubella down the witch elm, with the words Lubella and witch elm underlined. This had been just near the Old Hill School, and upon questioning the schoolmaster about it, he admitted to the officers that this had been there since Christmas 1943, 3 to 4 months before they reported to the police. It's also important to note that the word witch was spelt correctly in this message with a Y instead of like a spooky witch and, with an I. I think this is worth noting as, while not impossible with the presence of a school nearby, this could have been a child's prank, hearing of a body in a tree. But I think the correct spelling and the fact that it came with the same underlining added the Lubella, and the fact that if the schoolmaster is correct, it's been there for a few months before the Birmingham market messages were reported first. The messages were all photographed, with the chalk and handwriting being analysed, and the conclusion was that the inscriptions were made by the same person and the chalk was more or less similar. Following these messages and a story in the Birmingham Gazette, the public interest in the murder grew and more messages started to appear. The issue with these is that they are more likely a copycat as trying to gain attention, as those found on the 12th of April 1944 on Mucklow Hill had enough variation and enough different content to be part of not the original messaging group, or at least maybe not from the same person, and more likely a copycat. They read as the following: who put Bella in the Witch Elm, Hagley Wood? Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper. Annabelle died in Hagley Wood. Note the misspelling of witch and the random addition of Jack the Ripper and the lack of underlining. The same day, however, the police in Birmingham received two anonymous letters that were postmarked from Kidderminster, a town on the other side of Hagley. These are more interesting as the handwriting is similar, being in all capitals as well as the underlining. These letters are believed to be from Ada May Eddington and is referencing her now ex-husband at this time, Arthur Eddington. They read as the following: Hagley murder. What woman was 030930 signalman Edgington with the Hagley Road? One Sunday night near midnight came through Blaketown 05 o'clock next morning, going up the Birmingham Road, Kidderminster, where he then lived. Very fishy. It's kind of a bit rambly, but these are old letters and difficult to read. The second letter is even harder to read and difficult to decipher, but as the following, it says: the old man, if he can remember telling, where I could usit a woman for 1/2 crown, and what answered I gave him, is look as if you have near done for him. I bet he has cursed you under his breath. Now before, as he done any pinching lately, if he had done things he would have passed to a kid years ago. It was through you he broke his home. Up no dirty women here. There would be no bad men like you. Police believe these were part of a scorned woman looking to get revenge on her now ex husband after their separation. Having accused him of several things previously, that even if there was any legitimacy to her accusations, it was a little boy who cried wolf at this point and led to no further investigation. Then silence for 4 months, until on August the 1st, on Sun Street, Wolverhampton, on an archway, was the message Hagley Wood, Lubella, address opposite the Rose and Crown, Hasbury. We mentioned the Rose and Crown earlier. And the next two messages have been discovered the same day in Halzone, one on a fence and one on a railway arch. The fence read, address was opposite the Rose and Crown, Hasbury, Hagley Woods, Lubella. And the railway arch was, I used to Hagley Wood, Lubella was no pros. Pros being a slang word for a prostitute or sex worker. A consistent theory on who Bella was is that she was a local prostitute. After their discovery, PC Pitcher went to the Rose and Crown on Hagley Road, and taking stock of all 10 houses staying within the last 6 years, he also attended the timber yard of Willits and Son Company, which had a home on it, as well as Walter Willits and his wife. As mentioned earlier, this company owned the forestry rights to Hagley Wood, meaning the family and its employees would have been intimately aware of their knowledge of the woods, as well as visiting the woods during the time of the body's storage, which I personally find interesting. Then, in November 1944, on Station Road, Hagley was littered with more chalk messages. Hagley Wood, Lou Bella address was 404 Lower Hasbury, Halzowen, and 404 Lower Hasbury, Hagley Wood, Lou Bella address was. Just a bit difficult to read. Calls were made to 404 Lower Hadsbury by DC Lee, with the Allsop family living there. They had one son who was an RAF pilot in the 1940s and a daughter who had passed away aged 18 months around 20 years ago. This proved to be a dead end. But on the same day, November 2nd, the Birmingham City Police received this letter, which reads as follows: Sir, just a line you are letting me be at ease. I mean about who put Bella down the Wych Elm. If Hagley would, you know the writing on the wall in Smithfield some months back. That was me, Mr. Wood. Well, here is your chance. Meet me in the market of Colesville Street tomorrow, November 1st, 5:30, and you shall hear the truth all for now. Yours truly, Mr. Wood. Unfortunately, the letter did not reach the sorting office until 4 p.m. on the 1st, not till the police the next day, and the postmarks placed the letter being sent within an 8-mile area of Birmingham, which meant it could have been from hundreds of post boxes and post offices, with each one of them serving thousands of people, meaning finding its origins was completely impossible. The letter from Mr. Wood mentions the rating on Smithfield Street. The graffiti had not yet been reported and logged by police. One of the detectives, D.I. William, claims this was the work of a prankster rather than a legitimate lead, but doesn't state why this is the case, meaning it was just not followed up upon. Then, complete silence. Nothing but a few articles from newspapers, 10 messages, a letter within the space of 7 months, and then completely nothing. No one is sure why they would stop, as the story just fell into local folklore. Every kid in the surrounding villages knew the story of Bella and the Wych Elm, and for 40 years, not a scrawl, a letter, or anything. Then, 30 years after the discovery of the body, one of the most iconic images and enduring things in British mysteries appeared, overlooking Hagley Woods to the east and Hagley Town to the west, for all guilty eyes to see, showing the name of the tree that held the body of the woman, no doubt murdered and entombed in. Witchbury Obelisk was plastered with the question that has led to thousands of people down a rabbit hole, and is really the reason we have only just scratched the surface of who put Bella in the Wych Elm. There are a few women who could be Bella. As mentioned before, there were frequent travellers, Romani or Roma or Gypsy people who made up the surrounding area at that time. While terms like Gypsy may conjure up purely nomadic peoples, this isn't necessarily the case. While they do move about, it may be that the fact that they were the same place is based on seasonal work. Many of the time in the Hagley area worked in hop picking or other agricultural work when the seasons permitted. A lot of the time, stopping and pitching on the farmland, they worked. But due to an ongoing Holocaust in Europe that included large swaths of Roma people, they obviously weren't exactly ones to come forward with IDs or speak to authorities. Most notably, a log of names of all travellers who were at the Hagley area between October to November 1941. One stands out among the 61 people is Isabella Evans, a 35-year-old there with her husband, Alfred Evans. However, she died in 1985. Another possibility for Bella is an unknown Army land girl by the name of Sheila. Army land girls were civilian women who volunteered for jobs left vacant by men fighting in World War II. These, like Sheila, were commonly in farming. Now, this line of inquiry by the police is less about Sheila and more about her partner, Pat Graham. Now, it's unlikely Pat Graham was his real name, as he was brought to the attention of the police in 1944 by a Vivian Cross of West Hagley. After a chance meeting, Pat appeared at the dairy and spoke with Mr. Parson, the owner, claiming to be a former Rolls-Royce engineer. There is no record of a Pat Graham in the Rolls-Royce employee records at the time. He told Vivian that he had left the job as he had taken a van without permission and was hiding it in the Hagley Woods, which is a bit suspicious. He had a former fiancée who he claimed died in a car crash, as she was a race car driver, and would talk about her screams never leaving her mind. He would also be heard singing a song with the lyrics, My wife, she died. I laughed and I cried to think I was single again. Bit weird, mate. He hung around Parsons Dairy doing odd jobs in the autumn of 1942, being an odd but harmless character. Until in November 1942, Lord Cobham, the lord who owned Hagley Wood, and a police officer arrived at the dairy requesting to speak to Graham. He was there, but when Mr. Parson went to get him from the milk shed, he had seemingly fled. Vivian then went on her milk run, stopping at home at lunchtime, only to see Pat's partner, Sheila, driving a van stop outside her home, and a few minutes later, Pat Graham knocking on the door. He claimed he had taken some tyres without a permit and he needed somewhere to lay low. She then agreed to drive him somewhere, but he refused to give details until they were on the road. He also insisted on borrowing her red setter dog. They left after it got dark, and during the drive between directions, Pat would sing hysterically, laugh, and scream. Pat directed her to the entrance of Hagley Wood Lane. Eventually, he got out of the car, in which she asked him what he was doing, and he's quoted as saying, "I can't possibly tell you, but one day you might know." Then off into the woods he went, taking the dog with him. The next morning, she headed to work, and Mr. Parsons, the dairy owner, had her dog. He explained that Pat had arrived at his home at the dairy around 10:30 p.m. When the body was discovered in the tree, Vivian reached out to the police as the timeline synced up with the death taking place in 1942. Police identified Pat Graham, who was actually known as Kenneth Patton, and he was serving a prison sentence in Wandsworth Prison for theft. Upon questioning, he explained he'd been discharged from the RAF in 1941 and ended up in Stourbridge meeting the land girl Sheila. He moved in with her but did not recall her surname, which I find a bit odd. She lived in the cottage just off Hagley Hall main gates, which is a short distance from Hagley Wood. He claims that when he was arrested in 1943, it is the last time that he saw Sheila. It's unclear who Sheila was, and no one seems to be able to identify her, with the records of the time having any recollection of her. So, despite the fact that she was known by quite a few people, we don't know who it was. The line of inquiry into Pat seems to be more about his suspicious actions around Hagley Wood at the time of the murder likely occurred. Now, let's talk witchcraft. There are two reasons why the case is closely linked to witchcraft. The area of Worcestershire has a strong history of witchcraft and many historic cases taking place with the superstition of local folklore, with ritual sacrifice of animals to provide good harvest well into the late 19th and 20th century. A practice of community self-sacrifice to honour local deities such as Lammas, or more famously English folklore legend John Barleycorn, who each year would be sacrificed to as a metaphor for changing seasons and end of the harvest. This is where we get the origins of things like the burning of the Wicker Man, which made its way into pop culture in the 1973 classic The Wicker Man. The origins of John Barleycorn are fascinating and unfortunately not taught as widely as I believe they should be, most famously retelling by the Scottish poetic legend Robert Burns. If you're not familiar with that name, you may be familiar with such of his work like singing Auld Lang Syne on New Year's Eve. And here is a short excerpt from the Ballad of John Barleycorn. They hired men with scythes so sharp to cut him off at the knee. They rolled him and tied him by the waist, and served him most barbarously. They hired men with sharp pitchforks who pricked him into the heart. Now, one of the most obvious elements tying this case to witchcraft is that the left hand, sometimes called the sinister hand, was found buried a few feet from the tree, cleanly cut off. This is sometimes called a hand of glory, traditionally made from the hand of a murderer hung upon the gallows. It was kept and used the fat to create a candle, or the hair of the condemned would be used as a wick around the hand. Actually, one second. Just like, sort of like this recreation that I've got here. When lit, it would grant power over those who viewed its light. The left hand was considered evil for a long time, well into the late 20th century, with some of even my family members suffered beatings from nuns in Catholic schools for using their left hand, essentially having the sinister beaten out of them. The theory is that Bella may have been killed by local farmers in an attempt to boost the harvest in the late autumn of 1941, burying the hand in a ritual to bring about its flourishing bounty. In my research, while there is plenty of use of left hands in witchcraft, I can't find anything related to burying them. One reference in Baltic witchcraft about warding off vengeful spirits, but nothing really to help crops. The witchcraft theory was popularised by two people, Dr. Margaret Murray and Wilfred Byford Jones, who wrote under the name Quest or Seeker mentioned earlier in the video. Dr. Murray was involved in another case in 1945, the murder of Charles Walton, that was supposed ritual sacrifice tied to witchcraft. A case I'd really actually like to cover one day, depending on how well this one goes. But it's a supposed witch who caused blight in the local village. Images of black hounds surrounding the area shortly before he was found with his neck slit by a scythe. Two pitchforks in either side of the neck, pinning him to the ground, and just below a cross. Dr. Murray had consulted on these cases and claimed these cases were linked with there being proof of witchcraft was alive and well in rural parts of the UK and Ireland. Wilfred Byford Jones, who generally is a fascinating man, wrote two articles in 1953 that would not only expand the witchcraft elements to the public, but set out to provide proof of another common theory that Bella was a Nazi spy, but witchcraft was mentioned throughout his statements, such as, "I took a grip of myself for those who argued that the girl had been a victim of devil worshippers. It nearly frightened me away. I am not ashamed of this, and there must be a few people who have not at some time been seized by a half belief in the supernatural. It was easy to think of devils and witches here, of hellish brews and severed hands for spells. It was easy to fancy one heard the snapping of a nutcracker jaws when it was only a twig beneath the foot, or to hear the cackling laugh of witches when it was only an owl." Also, covering the hand of glory theory, while Wilfred found the whole witchcraft theory to be nothing but sensationalism, he did also interview members of the vicarage who claimed the body in the tree was a local gypsy woman who had been cursed with her tribe in what is known as the evil eye. So, is there any legitimacy to the witchcraft claims? To me, not really. I think it's a fantastic tale to tell kids, you know what I mean, around Halloween in the local area. Woman chopped up, rags stuffed in her mouth, and then thrown in a hollow ancient tree is incredibly creepy. But this really just seems to be a folk tale. There are ritual sacrifice examples, through history in the area, but it's one of those things I find really interesting. So I think it's important to cover. You know, you slap an A24 logo onto this story and it becomes one of the best films of the year, probably. But I don't believe there's anything that really goes bump in the night in the area beyond sort of drunk farmers and tractors, which leads us to our next section and theory. Was Bella a Nazi spy? Now, this is a really popular theory with who Bella in the Wych Elm was, that she was a Dutch spy working for the Germans at the time. The origins of this come from a few places, but all really stemmed from a letter received by Quest or Seeker, who I've mentioned a few times, one day before his article about the Wych Elm was published. In this letter, it came anonymously, but is later signed by Anna of Claverley. Claverley being a village around 13 miles from Hagley Woods. The letter was sent on the 18th of November 1953 to the Express and Star newspaper, and it reads as follows. "My dear Quester, finish your articles, re the Wych Elm crime, by all means. They are interesting to your readers, but you will never solve the mystery. The one who could give the answers is now beyond your jurisdiction of earthly courts. The affair is closed and involves no witches, black magic, or moonlight rites. Much as I hate having to use a nom de plume, I think you would appreciate it if you knew me. The only clues I can give you are that the person responsible for the crime died insane in 1942, and the victim was Dutch and arrived illegally in England about 1941. I have no wish to recall any more. I am no hoaxer. What happened to our mutual friend did he return to? Yours sincerely, Anna." A slightly edited version was then posted in the Express and Star on the 23rd, after the article, alongside other readers' letters responding to the original article by Quester, including one from Major R. Monckton, a master of the hunt who led fox hunts in Hagley Wood during the time the body was supposedly in the tree, stating that if there was a body in the tree, his hounds would have no doubt smelled the decaying corpse and alerted him to its presence. Also, within the letter from Anna is an interesting detail that her and Quaestor hold a mutual friend. A few days later, Quaester was also brought onto the case by local police to provide consulting on future investigations. The letter was examined and analysed by handwriting experts who claimed the F was of a continental persuasion. I mean, I can't see how, if it just looks like an F and different people from different countries write different letters, F's using all the same letters, but there we go. Following Anna's letter, public interest spiked, with various national newspapers approaching the local police to ensure they got a chance to print any future letters first as exclusives rather than a local paper like the Express and Star. The National swarmed onto Clavely in search of local Dutch people, only to find one single Dutchman who told the papers there was no Annas around there. But further digging did reveal that there was a bit of a Dutch enclave during the height of the war, with Wrottesley Park on the outskirts of nearby Wolverhampton being the home of the Dutch army following Nazi occupation in World War II. The Express and Star would receive more letters from the public across the next few days, but the article fell from public consciousness and the letters stopped until on December the 3rd, 1953, another handwritten letter fell on the desk of Quaester Seeker, simply marked urgent. It reads as follows: Dear Quaester, had so much publicity not been given to Anna, I would have contacted you before. I will meet with you and officers of the Worcestershire CID at the Dick Whittington. It is beyond the Stew Pony from Wolverhampton. Tomorrow night, Friday, at about 8:30 p.m. And maybe I can help with the investigations if they are still interested, subject to my conditions, which I think they will agree you, of course. I will not advertise this meeting in your press. You've had many wild goose chases during the last few days. Maybe this will be the last, or the beginning of many. Who knows? At the Whittington, they have a bar on the left. The entrance is called the Priest's Hole. Sincerely, Anna. This meeting did in fact take place with no official police record being released. Instead, two different versions from one from the journalist Byford Jones, otherwise known as Quaester Seeker, and one from Anna herself. Byford published this article 5 years after the meeting took place due to the ongoing investigation, and he states that the meeting took place at 8 p.m. in the Dick Whittington Inn, in which he himself, D.I. Williams, another detective to take notes, and a local policewoman met with Anna in the monk's room of the pub. Anna, real name Una Ella Hainsworth of Clavely, according to Byford, gave the following information. Now thought this case was wild before. Just wait. Una told those in the pub her former husband, Jack Mossop, went on a late night outing in April 1943 with two men, a Dutchman and a local trapeze artist who was appearing in nearby Coventry. They sat travelling back towards Halsowen with the Dutchman driving, and Bella sat in the back seat between Jack and the trapeze artist. They had all engaged in drinking, so it was not particularly unusual when this Bella collapsed in the back seat. And that was until the trapeze artist claimed that she was dead. They continued on and ended up in Hagleywood Lane. They all exited the car and stuffed the woman's body into a hollow tree. Una said her husband Jack returned to the woods the next morning to make sure she was actually dead. He is quoted saying, "There's no mistake. The body is there, all right, just as we left it." Jack told Una that he believed the Dutchman was not actually Dutch and, in fact, German, and a spy at that. He asked both himself and the trapeze artist if they knew any local factories involved in wartime manufacturing. Una, after this began, started to notice that Jack would come home with large sums of money and would not explain his origins, meaning he may have been providing information to this supposed spy. He told Una that Bella had entered the country illegally in 1941, claiming she worked for this mysterious Dutchman. Jack would have a nervous breakdown shortly following this in August 1942, where he ended up in asylum, which linked with this Anna's previous letters with the statement, "The only clues I can give you are that the person responsible for the crime died insane in 1942. While this story is fascinating, it is not without its issues. This information comes from an article written by Byford Jones 5 years after the meeting, which in the article he covers the story so far with lots of inaccuracies on basic real info, as well as Una Hainsworth's later giving her official statement to police in December 1953. It contradicted a lot of what Byford had said. So Una/Anna's statement is not one I'm really going to read verbatim. It's quite long, it's a bit rambly, and just to give a rough summary. Una Hainsworth and Jack Mossop married in 1932. Jack working for the Auxiliary Territory Service, a woman's service that was created to fill roles left by men fighting in the war. He also worked for various plane manufacturers in the area, so was privy to quite a lot of wartime information. Recalls that in 1940, a Dutchman by the name of Van Ralt met them in their home with Jack. It's unclear what his job was, and he refused to speak about it. He had large amounts of cash on him, and Jack also, after meeting Van Ralt, started to have this large amount of cash on him. He would also frequently travel away for days at a time in his own car, not informing his wife where he was going, and returning with much more cash. It was March or April 1941 that her husband returned home around 1 a.m., clearly agitated, stating that he had been in a nearby pub with Van Ralt and the Dutch piece. Jack said he was driving Van Ralt's car with Bella and the Dutchman in the back. When the man informed him she had passed out, he instructed Jack to drive them to Hagley Wood, and they would stuff her in a hollow tree that she would come to her senses the following morning. Jack would then go on to develop a drinking problem around this time and was notably more irritable and jumpy. But they would meet a few more times before Jack's death in 1942. On their final meeting, Una claimed that Jack was losing his mind, seeing the face of a woman in a tree, leering at him, watching him from every angle. He felt like he was going crazy and was always being watched by this woman of the tree. Of course, Jack would end up in an asylum shortly after this meeting, and while Una swears on this story being the truth, and to me she has no reason to lie, she says that she's not sure how much can be true when Jack was clearly in not a good state of mind. On top of that, the official police report in 1953 again differs in various areas. It also asks the question about the trapeze artist that's mentioned, whose name was most likely Frick or Frack, who was part of a double act and performing in nearby Coventry. Some people are confused as whether Frick and Frack were the same as Van Ralt. It's unclear because we don't really have any record of who these people were, but there is record of a trapeze artist act performing in those months in Coventry nearby, so kind of all lines up. Then on the same day as the meeting with Una, Bill Wilson gave his statement to the police. He was a friend of Jack Mossop and even lived with both Jack and Una for a short while. Bill had known Jack both from working at the Armstrong Siddeley munitions factory until Jack was fired in 1938. Jack had told Bill Wilson that he was discharged from the RAF due to an injury after a crash landing of a plane and suffered head injuries that gave him headaches and intense nightmares as well as hallucinations. Bill did not recall ever meeting a Dutchman called Van Ralt. Another suggestion of who Bella could have actually been comes from Donald McCormick's book, Murder by Witchcraft from 1969. Donald quotes the sources of his findings as the Abwehr Diaries, where he discovered that in March and April 1941, 5 agents were inserted into England from Holland. One was a woman whose codename was Clara, who was possibly parachuted into the Midlands area under the cover of an air raid, somewhere between Kidderminster and Birmingham, which is directly where the Halzone area is. Donald writes that he had no confirmation that Clara was dropped or that the authorities in Britain had any knowledge of a Dutch agent in their country. However, Donald's quest to identify Clara resulted in him tracking down a former Nazi living under an alias in Paraguay called Franz Ragabeith. Franz had been involved in the steel industries before the war and had spent time in England, mostly in the Midlands and South Wales, and he knew Stourbridge very well. Donald suggested that Franz and his colleagues had actively been recruiting Nazi sympathisers inside Britain's occupied territories. Donald suggested that Franz and his colleagues had been actively recruiting Nazi sympathisers inside Britain and occupied areas. Franz knew Clara and told how she had been a Dutch mistress of an agent whose codename was Leha. He described her as being well educated, intelligent, attractive, and about 35 years of age. Clara apparently knew Britain well, having lived in Birmingham for 5 years before the war. She spoke fluent English and had an unhappy love affair with a Stourbridge man. He recalled that Clara had irregular teeth, that she was attractive, but this blemish was pretty noticeable. She wasn't tall, probably well below average height for a woman. He also indicated that he thought she was from Utrecht. However, it was also possible that she was not Dutch at all, rather just posed as Dutch for the purpose of espionage. He also said that Clara read horoscopes. Franz provided Donald another contract, a Frau Kramer, who lived in Amsterdam. She told Donald that she could not identify Clara. She thought that the woman in question was known as Dronkers and was a relative of Johannes Maris Dronkers. She told Donald, although she could not identify Clara, she felt that the woman in question was known as Dronkers and was a relative of Johann Marius Dronkers, a German secret agent executed in Britain for spying. Also, she was friends with another German spy, Jan William Tech Brack, also found dead on the 1st of April 1941 in a deserted air raid shelter in Cambridge in the UK, where he had supposedly committed suicide. Another German spy captured by the English in Josef Jacobs also led to another theory that Bella was his lover. It was found with a picture of German actress and singer Cara Balliet. Jacobs claimed that she was recruited as a spy while singing in Hamburg and parachuted into the Midlands. A lot of weight is given to these claims of Cara being Bella, with Josef claiming that she was a spy, and the last records of her do actually line up with when Bella was found in the tree or the estimated time of death. It's also that she had a slight facial deformity when we know that Bella had a noticeable deformity in her teeth. However, she was reviewed frequently in the papers in Hamburg when she was a singer, and one thing that is noted frequently is that she was quite a tall woman, around 6 foot. And we also know that Bella in the Witch Elm was around 5 foot tall, so fairly short for a woman. There are, of course, lots of stories of psychics getting involved to provide any theories that they have, with one of the maddest ones being from a guy named George Elwell, who read Anna's letters and decided to go investigate the local Hadley Woods. So he went to the Witch Elm and took in its vibes, I guess, and then returned home and turning himself, into a trance by staring into a blinking car turn signal via a mirror and recording his voice, and whatever came out of his mouth, he said would be the truth. In this mad trance, he is recorded as saying the following: "It is very cold. There is a horse neighing somewhere. Raindrops on trees. Dark, very dark. A tree, yes. What's he got on his shoulder? Oh, God, blood on her face, on her hair. Oh, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead. Name, name, name. What's her name? Bradman. No, Bradley, that's it. Annie Bradley of Leeds. Yes, that's the man. Tall mustache. John Connor, John Connor, John Connor." And breathe. I wish there was some clear conclusion I could provide for you here today, but unfortunately, just like many mysteries, this remains a mystery. I have my theories and flip between Bella being a local Roma person and a World War spy, leaning slightly towards the local traveller sort of theory. This, though, is just me purely speculating. This case has fascinated me for a good few years, and it's been so cathartic just to go through this and be able to sort of vomit ideas down into a script and present to you. So I want to say thank you to everyone for listening to this little ramble. And I'd be interested in hearing any feedback on looking into more mysteries in the UK and getting to travel to local areas to see um, whether I can find anything out, or at least spurt some more ideas of weird stuff that happens in the UK to you guys. So I want to say thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.
As I stand next to this tree, I just want to say thank you. And if you are not already subscribed, So It Goes Productions is moving into a different phase. I've been kind of trying to work the algorithm and do lots of videos very quickly, but I realized I wasn't really enjoying that. So I'm going to try and make less videos of higher quality, maybe come to some locations, increase the production value, take some time, and make sure that everything is well researched, well documented, and hopefully just better for you guys. If that is something you want, then please do, comment, like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. But as well, I'm more than happy to hear suggestions on cases that you guys may want to hear. I like to focus on the UK because generally I can drive there. But if there's anything you guys want from me, then please just let me know. Now, if you're scared of witches, subscribe. So, I just want to take a second to say thank you all for watching, and if you're not already, then please subscribe. So It Goes Productions here. I've been sort of trying to work the algorithm the way and do shorter videos that maybe hit on, popular topics at the moment, but it's not really who I am and what I want to do with this channel. I want to make sort of longer form, well researched documentaries and look into the true crime, history, and all that weird stuff. If that's something you enjoy, then please do subscribe and stay along. If there's any particular UK or even world cases that you want me to have a look at, I will try and travel to them, get my boots on the ground, and see what we can discover. This one's just been one that I've been obsessed with for about 15, 20 years, ever since I heard that enigmatic phrase of who put Bella in the Wych Elm. But it can be anything, and I'm always ready for a new obsession, and I hope you guys can join me in being in really weird, creepy locations where witches might be. I don't know what else to say there. Thank you for watching. As always, thank you for watching. As always, thank you for watching here at So It Goes Productions. These woods are really creepy. So if you want to move on and head to, say, another video, there'll be something along here. If not, please subscribe and come back. We'll be doing more sort of longer form stuff. You won't see stuff from me every single week, but I'm hoping that when I do drop something every couple of months or month, maybe it's something interesting to you, and hopefully it can be a little bit more well researched and unique, hopefully, like this has been. Thank you for watching. Cheers now.